Welcome, welcome, welcome to another wonderful day, even though I am losing my voice. I've had a cold, which I got from my daughter. Yes, it is her fault, but it was a pleasure. And she's taken out my voice. Can you believe it? Most people are saying hip, hip, hooray, but not me for sure. But Tigrilla is here with me today to put up with it. And she's going to do most of the talking. Tigrilla, welcome.
That talk about like let's set the intention right from the beginning.
That's it.
Hello.
Totally.
Wishful thinking. I love it.
And as always, we're going to go with the flow because I don't have a clue what she does. And I didn't even know she was going to come on the podcast because I didn't even know I had one this week. But you know me, I like to go with the flow, and with the flow we do. So, Trigilla, just introduce yourself and tell us what you do to help people with their wonderful lives.
So I'm Tigrilla Gardenia, and I am a nature-inspired mentor and a certified life coach. Most often people get curious about the fact that I am called a world ambassador for plant advocacy. So I mainly work with multi-passionates and neurodivergent individuals, let's just say, of all persuasions. And I help them really kind of create an ecosystem life, like a living ecosystem where your life supports the way that you process, the way that you do things so that you can really live your life with ease.
Now, that's interesting. So, plant life, nature.
Mm-hmm.
What made you go in that direction as well as mixing it with neurodivergence? I've never heard that one before. That's a bit of a mixture, right?
It is. And it actually makes so much sense, but it is true that the way that our minds, like we've never really kind of understood and made the connection before, although there is more literature and more information coming out that's helping us kind of recognize these things. So let's kind of back up and start it off with, so you asked me how I got into this. So I live in a place called Damanhur. It's one of the largest spiritual communities in the world. It's located in northern Italy. And when I first started living here, I ended up having this encounter with a musical plant. My background is very diverse, very, very, very diverse. I am your typical multi-potentialite neurodivergent. Like I have a background in music engineering and electrical engineering, in high tech, in event production, in circus production. I was on tour with Cirque du Soleil. I have co-owned a circus. Like I was a spiritual teacher. I still am. I teach, esoteric topics like Kabbalah and sacred geometry. So I've got a very broad background, but music has kind of always been that continuous thread through everything. And I heard this music and I followed the music because it was so unusual. And it turned out that it was coming from a speaker connected to a box that was connected to a plant. And as I listened to this plant make this music, it was like everything awoke. It was kind of, I had gone through my spiritual awakening years before, and now all of a sudden I was going through this plant reawakening. And it was this understanding that this device, which is called the music of the plants, is basically a musical instrument for plants. But allowing the plant to make this music gave me the opportunity to see the plant as an individual being, as a person. And that was it. I was down the rabbit hole. Like it's been the last 12 years of really getting into the plant mind, understanding how plants think, how do plants operate, what are the senses that plants have, how do they use those senses? Because when we think about it, plants are sessile, they're rooted into the ground, which means they can't run away. So plants actually have to be more aware of what's going on and have to have lots of different inputs and have to use that input to better understand the environment and then process that input and then make decisions on where to go. And those decisions, most often than not, enhance the ecosystem. In other words, the plant does plant the way that a plant would do it, but the output is so supportive and integrated and sometimes competitive here and there, but in a very limited form to the environment. But the overall relationships are elastic. They change, they modify these different pieces. So if you think about it from the perspective of the multi-passionate mind, right, the person who has lots of interests, I did tech, and then I did music, and I was also, reading about esoteric things, and then I was, jumping around and, doing something really nerdy, and here I would go over this, and all these pieces is all those sensory inputs that I take in.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I think like a plant, because I can't run away, right? I'm sessile, I'm rooted into the ground, I can't run away. I have to think differently than, oh, these are all separate things. But instead, what happens when I think about all of these inputs as all weaving together? Like, what does each one bring into my life and give me in my life to help me express who I am and to help me think in the way that my mind thinks? All of my minds, my gut mind, my heart mind, my brain mind. But how do all these inputs help me process that so that then I can produce an output that is good for the ecosystem in which I'm in?
This is interesting. What I'm very curious about, though, in layman's terms, how does it technically work for the actual speaker system to actually interpret what the plant is trying to express itself with? How does that work?
Yeah, so that one is actually which surprised me, but relatively easy. So it's a biofeedback system. It's biosonification. So if you think about it, we all have electrical impulses that run through our body, right? We have neurons that fire and they have a certain amount of electrical input. Plants have a bioelectric or an electrical physiological system as well. So what this does is tap into that. So it takes the electrical impedance between the leaf system and the root system. So it has two little sensors that one gets connected to the leaf and one down into the ground. And then those two produces, reads in, there's an electrical current that comes through this, and then it reads that impedance. Over time, what we found in the years that I've now worked with this product, both as part of the company that was founded here in Damanhur, because when we built it as Damanhurians, starting in the late 1970s, the concept of it was really not so much about the music, but about how do we really hear what's going on with the plant? How do we enter into a different relationship? Because being a spiritual and esoteric community, our desire was to, reconnect with the plant, world. And so we thought, oh, this is a great way to kind of eavesdrop on what's going on. But what became super interesting was that as we were eavesdropping, they were eavesdropping on us. So the plant started to modify the music. And you know how musicians are, man. Anytime you have music playing and I'm a musician, I'm going to try to play along. I'm going to tap. I'm going to, I'm going to sing. I'm going to do something. And so what happened was that the humans would start to play and then the plant would start to shift. And then we started to realize, oh my goodness, the plant is actually hearing. Because remember, this is early from 70s, 1980s. It really isn't until from a scientific literature perspective, it's not really until the 2000s that the electrophysiological system of the plant starts to get known with the birth of something called plant neurobiology. But so this is earlier. Before that, we were just thinking, oh, this is a super cool way for us to kind of enter into this. We didn't think it was a relationship. We thought it was just listening. And then it was this relationship. So it's been, our algorithms are really looking to be as true to the plant as possible. Like, how is it that we can really give permission to the plant to make the music that the plant wants to make? And regardless of whether or not for us as human beings, it's considered musical, or is it, we do provide some scales in some cases, because just like any musical instrument has their scales, right? If I have a guitar, it's tuned different from a sitar, is tuned different from a piano. And so the device gives me the ability to do that. But other than that, the notes themselves are all played by the plant.
Okay, that's interesting. So you apply this to help people in what way? To help them in what manner and why?
Yeah, so the music of the plants in and of itself became a tool at first just for me, in the sense that it was my way of entering into this plant mind. Then I have a master's degrees in something called Vegetal Future, which is plants, social innovation, and design. And so, and I'm also a biomimic, or somebody who practices biomimicry, which is when we use examples from the natural world or the way the natural world does things in order to create products or social innovation. And so mixing all these together was where I started to really understand that we as humans have been taught to kind of go against our true nature, right? We've been taught focus.
Uh-huh.
We've been taught, which, come on, focus. Like, just focus. It's like, oh, that is so not the right way of thinking of things. But we've been taught all these different ways that take away our natural inclinations. And so the music of the plants, first, it's not just, I use it as both a tool in the sense that it's been used for healing, and it's been used also just to help people reconnect with their senses, reconnect with their natural tendencies and the essence and their true nature. But more than anything, what I do is about holding a safe space for that neurodivergent, multi-passionate mind to
Uh-huh.
dump everything into it, and then for us to look at it like an ecosystem. So we say, okay, these are all the input streams. Like, for example, one of my clients is, she plays a musical instrument. She used to teach yoga. She also is a designer. She's a business owner, and she is somebody who likes to travel and move from country to country to country. So all these streams in the kind of modern world, for a lot of people, think, well, those are counterintuitive to success. Success means picking one of them. And instead, each one of these has taught her different skill sets. And what we do when we work together is, how do we apply each skill set to whatever it is that she's working on? So rather than thinking of them as separate streams, that each one of them is kind of like, you have to learn them on your own, it's what happens when you take everything from all of them in every direction and you learn how to apply it to any aspect of your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. It's quite an interesting subject. Now, you interest me because you're quite diverse. It reminds me of the way my life is. I can't do one thing. I
Mm-mm.
give myself about 5 years and I've got to move on to something else.
All right.
Otherwise, it does my head in. Do you know what I mean? So I've got multiple skill sets just like you. Have you always been like this way back in the days, even as a child, or did this somehow come about in some kind of transformation?
No, I've always been this way. And for the longest time, just like you think, I got lucky in the sense that my mother never chastised me or made me feel like anything was wrong when I would, quote unquote, I'm going to use this quote and then I'll qualify why I think it's a quote unquote, leave something. Because she never did. As a matter of fact, I asked her once as an adult, I said, how come you never kind of pushed me towards, I was a dancer. I also played certain sports, and then I would just leave them. And she was like, because I just felt like, you knew where you were doing. And I was like, all right, which has its pluses and its minuses, but yeah, I danced, I played musical instruments, I was in the band, and then I left that. I did the band for 4 years, I danced for 9 years. I did, I was on the math team. I was an excellent student in certain things, and I did drama. I've been an actor. Yeah, you name it. I played on the volleyball team. I played on the softball team. I had the corporate softball team I used to manage for years. So I've done very, very many things, starting from when I was just really small. I used to call myself a chameleon because I would come into groups of people and I would learn. But it didn't ever come from I want to be, and I guess maybe that's the reason, as I was talking to my mother when I became an adult, I think that's what she recognized that I didn't really know. I didn't come into groups to try to impress them or to be a part of them, or I didn't change myself for the group. I was just genuinely curious, and I loved the idea of something new. Now, I wasn't necessarily fantastic at a lot of these things. I was good, or maybe sometimes just okay, but I loved getting into it and doing it, and then all the lessons. And what I did learn as especially, it hit me probably more consciously, like when I started working with the plants, it all sort of fell into place. But I started to recognize this about in my late 20s and early 30s,
Hmm.
which was the whole concept of the transferable skill. Like
Yeah.
I started it, of course, in business because I had started to move from one thing to another. But when I started working with the plants and I started to realize because we as human beings think about our five senses, right?
That's right.
Taste and plants have those same five senses in an expanded way and a light slightly different, which already helps us better understand those senses about ourselves. But they've got about another other 15, which means they're taking in a lot of input in very diverse ways,
Hmm.
pressure, sunlight, electromagnetic energy, like there's hydrotropism, like water in different kind of ways. And so I was like, oh, wait, if they can take all this in, and I'm a part of nature because I am nature, right? And I evolved from plants, then
Uh-huh.
could it be that I actually have a lot of different abilities that today we might call them paranormal, or we might, because even for plants, sometimes there's some abilities that they have that science calls paranormal to a certain extent because they just can't figure out the mechanism for it. And I was like, what if that's all these things that we as humans kind of in spots do? What if those are actually just senses that we, for whatever reason, have disused, and so we've sort of forgotten how they work?
Mm.
And if we were to think like a plant, if I allow myself to enter into that core essence of myself, right? Something I evolved from. And
Hmm.
I think about it as the presence, right? Because plants are present, their beingness. My animalness is the instinct, the movement, all those different aspects. But my plantness is the part of stillness, not stillness as in doing nothing, but as in
Uh-huh.
pure presence. And so
Yes.
I was like, if I was to think of myself and of all these streams that way, what is it and then I think of all these as senses, all these different aspects as senses that I'm bringing into myself, then they've got to hook in somewhere, right? They've got to connect together somewhere. And I think that once you start to do that, anything you learn, doesn't matter what it is, all of a sudden becomes useful and accessible to everything else you learn.
Mm. Mm. I totally agree with you, and it's just the way life is, or every experience goes to something, be that in our personal life or work life. It doesn't have to be so-called directly related,
Mhm.
but it's just like being street smart, right?
Mhm.
The reason why you're street smart is because you've had to learn one extreme issue together, and that still works for your work situation, still
Exactly.
works for your personal life, and etc. Um, and because you had so much contrast within you growing up with doing so many things, and it wasn't a situation where you didn't keep to it, because it wasn't you did it for 3 weeks, moved on, did that for 6 weeks. You did it for years. You did certain
Mhm.
things for years, and then you moved on. So you actually built the skill set of that thing.
Right.
So you're gathering all the skill set to actually bring into your work life and your personal life at that time or at a later stage. And that's the same thing with me. So I totally understand where you come from. So, people look at me and think, Eli, how come you can do all these, multiple things? Because most people, and we're taught this, is just to specialize in one thing for the whole of your
Right.
life, or the two things. So people are surprised when we're in a position when we can do all these different things, which most people only specialize in those one and two. So I get that.
Mhm.
Um, but we're made to feel we're not right. And totally what you're saying about the focus situation, right?
Yeah,
Focus,
absolutely.
focus on one thing, focus on that.
Yeah, and I would add, let me just add one thing that I think is beautiful to add from the piece that you said. I think also once we recognize that, like you said, we're building up, we're doing it. We're not
Mm,
just fiddling around, we're doing something. And if you leave it because you feel like in that moment you've completed whatever cycle it is, whatever
yeah,
that might be. So
yeah.
I don't leave in avoidance, which I think is the key difference. Like when I work with my clients, it's about really looking, the multi-potentialite doesn't leave something out of avoidance. The
Mm,
multi-potentialite feels like that thing is no longer necessary
mm,
in that form,
mm-hmm,
but the multi-potentialite also could re-enter it in a different moment in life with
mm-hmm,
no problem. So for example, I said I danced for 9 years. I use that as like when I was a child, right? When I
mm-hmm,
was young, all the way through to when I finally like put my ballet slippers and my character shoes away, which actually is funny because they're sitting on and I'll explain that in a minute because it kind of fits into what I was talking about. They're actually sitting in my room right now out because there's a part of me that's going to reconnect to them. And then when I was an adult, like after I had moved out, I had moved to another city, I was living my own life, I had, everything. I actually spent like a few years in another form of dance.
Mhm.
I went back to some of the old ones and then I introduced some new ones. And it was like in my mind, my learning mind, there
Mhm.
was a continuation. Yes, my
Yeah.
body was different. My skill sets were different. I was able to also integrate other things that I had maybe done, like the sports, the this or the that.
Uh-huh.
But I was able to kind of pick that up, not as in I've left it behind and I have to relearn it or anything like that, but more of, oh, okay, my body now needs, or something in me needs those skill sets to be developed in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to take all of that past. I'm going to take everything else that I've learned in the years doing other things, and then I'm going to integrate that and I'm going to continue forward.
Mm.
And I think that that's something that we, as multipotentialites, and probably what we label as ADD and ADHD and all these
Mm.
types of things,
Mm.
do not give ourselves enough credit for, is how great we are when, again, we're not doing it from trauma and we're not doing it from avoidance, and we're doing it really from that curiosity, to be able to leave something for now because you've completed it, and then pick or maybe re-enter something either similar or the same, but in a different stage of life, because it brings in a whole series of different skill sets into it. And it allows me to learn different parts of it. I was
Mm.
never going to be a ballerina or a professional dancer, but it did give me things that I integrated into my acting. It gave me things that now as an adult, I integrate into my body to make sure I'm healthy. It gave me a movement that I integrate, in a finesse that I integrate into my work environment and that I think about in the way that I do my work. It gave me a stage presence that I use when I speak. It gave me a whole series of other things that I integrate when I used to produce events. Like, it gave me so many skills that I continuously build and play with.
Mm. And I can see that for sure. Excuse me. So looking back at your childhood, which is quite unusual actually, you was supported by your mother to
Mhm.
be you. It's not funky for you to go from one thing to another or be a bit scatty or whatever. So you were allowed to do the thing that made you feel comfortable. Did you have that same support with your peers, teachers, etc.? What was it like growing up, being ADHD, which I'm sure you didn't know you were at the time?
Mm-mm.
But when you look back now, how did everybody else look and treat you with this skill set you had?
Yeah, it's a really great question because, I mean, I had things like, there's those key moments that stick in your life. Like, for example, when I was in elementary school,
Uh-huh.
I literally had a teacher that took my desk and pushed it to the front of the room, right under the right side of the chalkboard, like
Mhm.
literally against the front of the class. So everybody was behind me. You usually walk into class, you have like the chalkboard back then, or whatever. Yeah, it was chalkboard. It wasn't whiteboards back then. Chalkboard on the right hand side, and then all the little desks on the left, and then that's the classroom piece. And mine was pushed up in the front because, as she wrote in my report card or whatever to my mother, I totally will still remember it. It says, "Learns concepts fast, then talks incessantly," or something around the lines. And it was disturbed. So they pushed me to the front because I would disturb the class, and because I was just like, I was bored, of course, in that way. But I think where I start to, as an adult, piece together, why is it that I didn't at least feel, which could be a mindset thing, to be honest, like I didn't feel the pressure that most people did,
Mhm.
was probably because, one, I was extremely active. So my distractions were always into organized activities to a certain extent. Like, I wasn't the lone child that maybe like sits and does art for a while and then goes and does this. So I was in like school clubs, and I was always, I danced, like I said, and I did this and I did that and I did the
Mhm.
other thing, but they were usually organized events. And so I probably looked like I was, I don't know, part of the team to a certain extent. And
Uh-huh.
then the other aspect was I have older brothers. And at some point, for example, when I would start getting bored in school, I grabbed their books. Don't ask me why. And I would like do their math work books and stuff like that. My brothers are 10 and 8 years older than I am, so way older. And I would just like, sit there and do that. So I guess I was really good at entertaining myself in ways that were probably my biggest disruptive thing was the fact that, and still is the biggest disruptive piece, is that I talk a lot. And so,
Uh-huh.
but other than that, I guess because I was in that way. And I do think that another thing that helped me was, I don't know why, and it's probably why I'm so passionate about helping others.
Uh-huh.
I never had the mentality of leaving things. I always had the mentality of moving on to something new.
Okay.
And so it's such a small distinction, but it's more like, for example, I stopped dancing in part. You can't see it now, but when I was 4, I got into an accident and my forehead was chopped open, and so I had a big scar across the middle of my forehead.
My God.
Yeah, it was long story. It was horrible, but to the plastic surgeon my parents took me to right away because they were worried that I would have this massive scar. And he said, don't worry about it because she's a child, which means that it'll come into your hairline, right? So over the years, the scar is actually now right up here. You can't see it from the video, but it's right up here. And so
Yeah.
most people don't notice it. And so, so I had bangs because, you're a teenager, you're worried about your looks, you got bangs. So I stopped dancing when my ballet teacher told me I had to pull my hair completely back into a bun. And I was like, I'll put the bun on, but I need the bangs. And they couldn't understand the scar. So for me, it was like, okay, that's a sign that this is no longer for me. Like I am done. and I guess my mother must have understood like that's the reason I was doing it or something, because she never said anything. So in my mind, everything sort of came to a natural end for
Oh.
different reasons. And I just went in a different direction afterwards. Like the school year would end and I would go this way. Or like, for example, a perfect example of how diverse I was is that when I graduated from high school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer because I took a
Uh-huh.
lot. So I went to one school with that intention. And then after less than a year, I came back and I was like, okay, that's because I read some books that made me realize I was not going to go into law. I couldn't deal with the moral thing. I didn't have the
Yeah.
constitution for the moral dilemma of being a lawyer at that time. And so I came back and I started to look and I said, what are the things in my life that are consistent? If I'm going to study something in college, it might as well be like something that I'm passionate about. And the two things, which made no sense, was music. I had always thought of it as a listener, not necessarily a performer. I'm not the best performer, but music and math. And I was like, how the hell am I going to put music and math together? And that was where I discovered that the best school in the country for music engineering was in my backyard. And I was like, well, I guess that's what I'm doing. And so it was like out of left field. My brother looked at me and he was like, what do you mean engineering? And I'm like, dude, I'm really good at math. He's like, yeah, but wait, that does make sense. And it was like, nobody had realized that I was years, because I graduated from an unusual school. And so there was only 5 people in my math class for the last 2 years, because we were 2 years ahead of like
Uh-huh.
the high school programs. We were in second year of college by
Uh-huh.
math, but nobody had ever thought of me as like the math whiz, because I talked a lot. So I was the sociology like it was just all these funny little pieces that you don't realize. So much of this is, I think, a testament to one, my mindset, but also like little things that you talk about that allow other people to see you in a different light, and that allow you to see the direction that you see rather than the activities that you're doing in the moment. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully it does.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it works for us, it works for you. Um, I just want to know, with hindsight, do you see any way whatsoever from a negative point of view you was allowed without any reins to do what you wanted to do, go flittering from one thing to another? Now, we obviously know it was a purpose thing. It wasn't because you was bored or whatever. It was a natural
Right.
clothes. But do you ever think to yourself, if I was given more focus, be that partly or fully, your life would be different
Mhm.
and not necessarily better, but in an improved way? Have you ever
Yeah,
thought of it from
I
that way?
have, and I love this question because, again, when we're thinking about, like I said, I live in a spiritual community and we have a lot of children, and I think a
Mhm.
lot about these types of things of that right flow between giving you space and at the same time helping you reach mastery. So I'll give you the example of the ballet thing that I was
Uh-huh.
talking about. Now, I was definitely not the physical type of having, to become a ballerina. I wasn't that person. But
Uh-huh.
for example, had my mother had a different skill set at that time to be able to have the conversation, both with myself as well as with my teachers about this, I wouldn't have dropped all my dance things. I might have danced in some things.
Mm.
And I think about that in some areas where I don't think it was so much of like, you have to focus, because I don't think that that would have helped anybody. But I
Mhm.
do think that I might have concluded early things that I then tried to pick up as an adult, that had I had somebody who was there who literally held my hand for a second and said, "Are you sure?" Or "Can we experiment with it in a different way?"
Yeah.
For example,
Uh-huh.
which is not saying you have to focus or not saying you need to keep doing it, what you're doing, but okay, if something's not working right now, at a minimum, before you drop it,
Uh-huh.
or would it be useful to explore it in a different way, maybe a different teacher, or maybe a different technique, or
Uh,
maybe something like that?
I hear
I
you.
do think that there are some things that I would have gone much deeper in. For example,
Yeah.
I speak multiple languages, but the language that I studied the most in school, which was French, is still one of my weakest. And I think it's because, again, like many kids, when you finish school or whatever, you just let it go. Had my mother looked at me and said, "Hey, you really seem to enjoy this. Can we try a different way? Like, can
Mm.
we approach it maybe not an academic perspective? Like, could we do it with a tutor? Could we, enroll you in a group kind of environment where it's like in a different thing that's not so academic? Or is there an activity that I could join or something like that?" I think that the tweaking of the fact that our minds process things in different ways, and
Mhm.
having had as a child the ability to explore that it's not the overarching thing, but maybe just that technique of it that wasn't working anymore for me, that
Mhm.
had worked, but then now I needed a different technique for it. I do think that there are some things that would have changed and could have avoided certain heartaches, for lack of a better term, that happened later. Because, for example, I use a lot of examples, as you can tell. I'll use another example that I thought was really fascinating to me. I did not learn how to study until my senior year of university. And so I had done most of my, schooling up
Uh-huh.
until I got to college, because I was smart, so things came to me and I was smart and I would get excited and then I would, whatever. But I didn't have any kind of study techniques. When I
Mhm.
got to college and I hit topics that were, especially because I was studying engineering and I did not come from an engineering background, like, oh, some shit really, like, some stuff was really, really hard. And my mind wasn't formed enough to process, like, am I just supposed to let this go, or is it just that I don't know? Until a few friends of mine, I kind of was like, how do you guys study? Like, I don't know. I don't have any techniques for studying. I just, read the material and that's it. And so different friends of mine started giving me different things that they would do. And in playing with that, my senior year, I discovered the mechanism that works really well for me. Like,
Mhm.
I have to write things down. I highlight in a book. Like, if I have a book, I highlight the book and then I write in the margins, and then I have to
Mhm.
copy everything to a notebook. And when in that copying process, everything falls into place.
Ah.
And, it's been refined and changed and modified and all these types of things. But I didn't know that. Had I known that, those first 3 years of university would have been way different,
Yeah.
because I would have been able to learn material in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I'm still a big advocate that study hall should not be just people sitting there, but study hall should be where we teach you different techniques to study. That's what study hall should be.
Well, better later than never, I
Yes.
say. And the thing is, it seems like nobody's life is perfect when they're growing up. I'm sure you had issues when you're growing up, but in general, you had a wonderful time from the point of view of having that support, especially with the ADHD, so-called lack of focus and
Mhm.
everything else. Um, and then obviously you've brought that back into when you're studying, you found out things about yourself and you've taken that on further. But in general, it seems like you were accepted to a certain point of view and you weren't downplayed while you was growing up,
Mhm.
which is quite unusual. How much of that do you think has helped just to have that support? How significant is it to have that support when you look back?
Oh, incredibly significant. Like on the one hand, I don't think, I of course, because like attract like sometimes. My friends were
Mm.
the genius kind of what is it? The misfits of the schools, because that was kind of my attitude. And I'm good friends with a few of them still. And
Uh,
it's always beautiful to compare notes, because these are the people whose, like one of my friends who I talk to regularly, whose mind is just so fast, so fast. And I think about everything that, he went through as a kid when we were young, um, because there wasn't that understanding and his mind was just so quick at dealing with things, but he didn't have other skills that I realized that I have, and he didn't have that supportive family
mm,
that would, like, I had one kid that I literally started to call my son and took under my wing, because I would just be able to hold that space for him that his parents weren't able to hold,
mhm,
because his mind was just going, 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 and still goes. And he still calls me sometimes because he's like, you're the only one who I could like say all these things. Everybody else would look at me like I'm insane. And you can then just figure it all out, how it works, and play it back to me in that continuous line. So I do agree that I think knowing, how do I say this? For me, since I grew up mainly with my mother, and my knowing that my mother had my back,
uh-huh,
like, was really formative, because it gave me um it gave me the ability to not question certain kinds of things, even if I knew I was going to fail at them. Like, and it probably came, now that you're saying this, as we're talking about this,
mhm,
I hadn't realized, like, one specific event that happened when I was still in elementary school, where my mother very much had my back, and was, I mean, I gave her the ability to have my back, in the sense that because I was, able to do certain things, but she had it. And I think you're right, that
mhm,
sense of, like, here's this horrible thing that's happening, because it was a thing that was happening to a group of us in school, that
mhm,
could be, parents could be like really pissed off at you, and like, but my mother knew me. And so she turned around and she looked at me and she's like, this, and this, you're not doing this ever again. Like, this is no. But this, and this, I'm going to go fight them on this, because this, and this, you deserve, this isn't you. And I think the fact that my mother was able to have those conversations with me from a very young age. I used to say my
uh-huh,
mother never punished me. She would sit me down and have 2-hour conversations until I punished myself, because I
uh-huh,
understood what I did wrong.
mm,
And I think that was probably incredibly formative in being able to kind of get to oh, okay, I looked at it from a completely different point of view, and that's how I got where I got. But you're telling me that you're looking at it like this, and I get why that goes there. And so that probably really helped me feel supported, and yet at the same time, you know, like I could explore different
mm.
things.
Would it be right, excuse me, would it be right to say that you're very similar to your mother?
Yeah, in a completely different way. Here's the funny part about my mother. And I love her, and we talk about this all the time. My mother, okay, so I'm going to say a word and it's going to sound wrong, and then I'll qualify it just so it is. My mother is not courageous. in the sense of that's how she views herself. My mother plays life a lot safer. But what she said to me once, which again, another one of those phrases that your mother says that you stays in your head is, I never wanted you to be afraid of the things that I was afraid of. And I
Mhm.
and I think so I think we're very similar in how we approach the things. And then from there, but I can take it the next step because she was always there. And where she herself has made decisions very consciously to like, I mean, she's way more courageous than she thinks she is. I've always told her that. But I'm saying like she didn't, she didn't. I mean, she left her own country to come to live to another country. I mean, she did a lot of things, but
Yeah.
she's not somebody who's going to go off and like start a business or do all these other pieces. And that's part of her upbringing. But she never wanted the things from her upbringing that held her back to ever hold me back in particular. So it's
Mm.
funny because we are similar in how we process things, but the actions we take from them were completely different.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. To be honest, what I would say is that you and your mother are the same. The only difference is that with whatever that was happening in the time when she was growing up, she didn't have the I wouldn't, no, guts is not the right thing, but the confidence in whatever that was going on in her life. So you are the same. But
Mhm.
what she's done, she's flipped it on that head and think, oh my God, that's what I would do. And she's put you in an environment she never had
Yep.
to allow you to breathe, to give
Yep.
you the confidence to do the things that you need to do, which she always wanted to do.
Exactly.
So
And
she
that's
would have
it.
made the same choices as you, but she didn't have the environment and the backup, the support to do the things that she wanted to do, which is basically what you're doing now. Does that
Most
make sense?
likely. Absolutely. I mean, most likely that's it. And it's funny because as we were growing up, I saw her as, I mean, she was much more, and like I said, we don't necessarily see ourselves the way others do. And so I always
Mhm.
saw her as courageous. I always saw her as um not just she was responsible, and yet she had fun and she had all these different aspects. And that's why I always tell people I feel like it's really important for children to see their parents at 360 degrees. I mean, you sure,
Mm.
of course, there's some things you keep behind. Okay, maybe, 340 degrees type of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And I think that is
I-
important. But I loved seeing her like live her life. And probably the other piece was that she and I have always been able to talk things through. We didn't always agree. I, definitely am way more rebellious than she is. But yeah, I do agree with that. I think she very much did not want me. She wanted me to feel that support as best
Yeah.
as she could. And I also feel like she wanted me to be able to have the space to do the things that I wanted to do, as
Uh-huh.
long as she could, as long as she trusted my even when my mother would give me rules, like even simple rules like your curfew. My curfew was way earlier than many of my friends, and she would, she's always said to me very, very clearly, she's like, I'm not your friend, I'm your mother. So we can talk and we can have really in-depth and great conversations, but in the end, I make decisions because I'm your mother, and I'm always going to tell you what I think is the right thing to do. Then you do with that, and she literally says that, you do with that whatever you want now. Like, but I am always going to tell you what I think is the right thing to do because I'm your mother. I was like, all right, fair enough.
Well,
Fair
at least
enough.
she explained that to you. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
main thing, rather than just tell you this is what you're going to do, but she had that conversation with you.
yeah. I would say that is for a person with my way of processing, that was the number one thing that she did. She never had a fear of having a conversation. And she's never had that fear. We still sit and talk. And oftentimes, because we grew up in two generations, she was a little older when she had me. She grew up in one country, I grew up in another country.
Uh-huh.
Like, so we would often talk and so about that, like, oh, I can see that from your point of view because of the different, I mean, of course, when you're teenagers, it's all crazy, but I'm saying as we got older, but we could have those conversations. And the fact that, like I said, she never just straight up, I mean, she grounded me when I knew the reason I had done something, whatever that might be. But
Uh-huh.
if it was things that were like, I don't understand why I have to be here at this hour. And I remember one time I came home late and, we sat down and she's like, okay, let me just explain to you what happens when you're late. When you're a little bit late without calling and without saying anything, okay, maybe for a minute, I'm like, oh, she's just late. But then when it starts getting longer and you're not
Mhm.
here, I start going into panic because I start thinking, is she dead somewhere? Is somebody hurt her? Has something happened? So,
Mm.
so that period of time where you're off playing and you're thinking, oh, it's not that bad. I'm sitting here worried out of my mind, which
Yeah.
means my heart pressure, my blood pressure goes up, my heart is racing, all these types of things. And do you think that's fair for me? Like, do you think that's fair? Like, is that what I'm supposed to do? Like, if you would call me and we'd have a conversation, maybe. But if you just show up late, then what happens? I have to call your brothers and wake them up. I have to call the neighbors. I have to start calling the police. Like, do
Mm.
you see the chain of events here that your lateness is causing? All right, kid, I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it.
Beautiful. What a
Yeah.
beautiful relationship.
Yeah. She's
Having that
great.
conversation.
She is definitely, I feel very, very, very privileged, super, super privileged. My brother and I say that all the time. We're like, look at what she's doing at 83. And like, look at what she's doing. So
And
yes, we're very lucky.
and when it comes to your brothers, how's the relationship with you all? Were you very similar?
Mm.
You've got ADHD. Do they have ADHD? And if not, what was the relationship and how did they handle you with the way you were?
So my oldest brother does. My oldest brother is my twin, 10 years apart
Uh-huh.
and it's really fascinating for me to see the different roads that we took that I think going back to like what helps the ADD mind. I think
Uh-huh.
he came from a generation that still tried to tell you to focus. I don't think so much from there's a few different perspectives. Like, my father was part of their lives, was not part of my life. We have the same father, but we just, for lots of different reasons, didn't have, I didn't have the same kind of interaction. My parents divorced when I was way young.
Uh-huh.
They stayed in contact with my father. I didn't. So a lot of other things that happened. But and so it's really interesting to me and probably could be somewhat, I don't know what's the right word, helpful is
Mhm.
maybe, or another data point that I used is the fact of like my oldest brother, who is very similar, like similar to me in the way that we think of the world. And
Mhm.
I still think he's way more intelligent than I am, but that's another story. And
Is that
yet,
possible?
and yet how that disciplined world, like I've even asked my mother, I'm like, why are we so different? And she's like, oh, because I raised you right. And I was like, she's like, I was testing things with them. Like it was just plus, your father was in the way. Like there was a whole series of other things that were happening. And she's like, so you just, you were raised different. We had a different relationship. Probably also because I'm the girl, but then I'm the baby, but more because I think she was able to do things in a way that was just, like I said, correct. Because my mother would never tell me anything that wasn't like correct for herself, but at the same time, and so my brothers are very, very different in the way that they approach the world. One of them is, like I said, he definitely, he has a whole series of different acronyms, let's just say, connected to him,
Okay.
and had different struggles and dealt with them in very, very different ways, which to a certain extent also, I don't know, maybe, I don't want to say scared straight because I don't feel like I was ever scared, but like there was things relating to my brother's oldest brother, who is the one I'm closest to,
Uh-huh.
his lifestyle that I realized. I was like, oh, this is what happens when you do that. Like, I don't know. This is what happens if you try to escape into drugs. Like that shit doesn't work.
Mm.
Like, or, like maybe I also, probably one of the ways that I learn things is I learn
Uh-huh.
through others. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's what happens if you do that. No, I don't want to do that. I don't need to do
Yeah.
that. No thanks. No thanks.
So you were lucky in the way that you had an example, and unlucky for him because, you know,
He was
he
the
had
example.
he had the bad example, and
Yeah.
that's the way it goes. So it is what it is. That's the main thing is that you're taking all those skill sets you've had from growing up to now, and you're
Mm.
helping people with all those things that you have learned through yourself. So How do you now apply that to help people?
Yeah, I think I apply it in kind of similar, in some ways what I do is in part no, let me say this. The biggest way that I help is that I'll say it in a quote that a client of mine said. She says, I feel like you're the kind of person that I can tell absolutely anything to, and
Mm,
you'll help me figure out how it's useful. So she's like, it doesn't matter how much I'm struggling or if I'm angry or if I did something really bad or whatever, you can help me see how that fits into the overall ecosystem that is my life. Whether it's a lesson that I learned from it or how do I apply it or how do I deal with it or those types of things. And so I think that having lived through so many different pieces, having those, my own personal archetype, which is much more of a bridge. Like I love helping you see from where you are to where you need to go to being the person who makes sense of it all
mhm.
rather than sitting in anger or unfairness or whatever. It's sure it's good to recognize it. And I definitely work with like what I call kind of the sacred anger, the anger that is the righteousness, the injustice of things, as most ADHD people have that deep sense of righteousness, but using it and applying it and working with it is probably the biggest thing. So for my clients, that's what I do. I hold that space where we can then take everything and really look at it with a bigger picture, but then apply it. So it's like look at it at the macro, but then apply it on the micro.
Mhm.
And that's why I switched. I mean, when I first started working with this, I had, I had just the mentor, and then I had the idea of leadership coaching, because it is a lot of leadership, personal leadership. And, it's like, it's not business because it's your life. And that's why I call it life
Mm,
coaching, because it really is about creating a flexible life for yourself.
yeah.
And the other piece, which I do love so much to do, is we sometimes need the mirrors to just see how awesome we are. Like
Mm,
having that person who you describe something to them that maybe for you is horrible. And the person says, well, did you just see how you did this, this, and this there? Or like, what happens when I look at this piece? And they're like, oh, yeah, wait a minute. And I think helping people see just how much knowledge and skills and talent they have, and that oftentimes we've been conditioned out of recognizing it, or we're
yeah.
afraid of recognizing it
Yeah.
or of embodying it. That's another big thing that I really do. I love helping people see how great they already are.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a very bad body image, and I did so for a very long time. One of the reasons why I started this podcast took me a long time to accept who I was. So I'm glad you're in a position to do the same thing for others, trying to help, and similar to what I do. Um, and it's very sad when you look back on your life and you think to yourself, oh my God, really? Why did I not accept this? Or why have I
Yep.
wasted so much time? But we've all got to go through that journey. It's all part of the journey, isn't it? For us to just discover who we are and who the people really are around us.
Mm-hmm.
So some of us learn later than others. I'm one of the later, but better later than never at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Your soul needed this piece, right? There's something in this life that your soul needed in order to accomplish,
Yeah,
whatever it is that the soul is accomplishing. And so, there's no, the time, okay, it took, but that's the other piece of once you get there, what I love is that you're
mhm,
able to look back and see all the beautiful things that you didn't recognize.
yeah,
And I find that another powerful piece of it. It's like once you make peace with where you are right
mhm,
now,
mhm.
and you fall in love with that presence of the here and now, then you look back at the past and you're like, oh that was terrible. But in that terribleness, there was this teeny tiny little thing right here. It's like, wow, how the hell did I ever learn that in the middle of all that? Type of thing.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And also, that's what brings on strength and resilience. Without those struggles, you cannot be wise.
Mhm.
You cannot be strong in character. It just doesn't happen. You're not born,
Mhm.
and you're built with this character. Some people have more stronger traits in one way, but that's still got to be built in your environment and your experiences.
Mhm.
So when we now look at the industry, how the most successful entrepreneurs, richest people, etc., are neurodivergent, ADHD, dyslexic, and etc. The reason being is we've had to go through a lot and struggles and had to do things on our own because the
Mhm.
system and society are not built for us. So we've had to go through hardship. So I would suggest that's one of the reasons why we're so successful when it comes to business, because we feel we have no other choice.
Right.
A lot of us feel like, who's going to, employ us? What
Mhm.
am I going to do? So you find ways around things, you adjust, you adapt, and you have to go through your trials and tribulations to be able to get to a point of success. It's how it goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there is so much learning that comes out of that that gets
Yeah.
applied then. Like you said, that okay, my mind thinks in, I don't know, red and blues, but my clients or my friends or whatever work in yellow and green. So what do I have to do? It's kind of like that colorblind person. What do? They have to
Mhm.
map. So it doesn't mean that I don't see the world in my, yellows and blues. Totally see my world in these colors,
Yeah.
but I adapt them so that I can have a conversation with somebody else who's seeing things in different without saying, "Oh no, that's wrong." Because if you say there, you're stuck. You're not going to go anywhere. But if instead I start to say, "Oh, okay, when you say the word green, I'm thinking of the blue. And
Mhm.
when you say, this over here, red, I'm thinking of yellow." And I might qualify it at once and say, "Hey, just so you know, I don't really see the colors you do, but I understand." And then
Mhm.
and then afterwards you can do things. And I think that we, as all these neurodivergent minds, have to find all these mind maps. We have to. And I think that that's what I think the kinds of work that we do is helping you find those mind maps faster, so that you don't have to struggle for 30 years like many of us did to
Mhm.
like create these maps and go through these types of things. Because obviously I'm telling you stories right now of really beautiful things, but in the meantime, kids are cruel. The world business doesn't necessarily always know how to deal. We also adapt in lots of different ways, and I've had my share of problems and difficulties and changes and things. And the beauty is that now I can bring that space and hold that
Mhm.
space and be like, okay, your boss is asking you to do this, this, and this.
Uh-huh.
And you're telling me you don't know how to do it. Are you sure you don't know how to do it? Or is it just that you don't know the words he's using to describe it? Can you describe it in a different way? And
Mhm.
then, oh, well, he's asking me to do this piece over here. Okay, great. Do you know how to do that? He's like, yeah, but I do it using this, this, and this. It's like, great, let's do that. Let's use what you use. And then when it comes time for you to create the final output, we'll figure out how to build the mind map for you so that you can just map it into the words that your boss needs. And I think that that's a skill set that doesn't get taught very often. And we all have, because we've lived through it and we've had to create all of these for ourselves.
It's true. No, totally. And with that said, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time. But what I would like to know is, when you're helping your clients, what services do you offer in a way? Do you do a one-to-one? Do you
Mhm.
do group? Do you do corporate? Just let us know how and what way you help clients.
Yeah, I always do. So I do both group and one-to-one.
Uh-huh.
I have an online ecosystem, which is all to support human-plant relations and working with plants to develop yourself, called the Naturally Conscious Community.
That's
And
great.
so even when I do one-on-one, which I love doing, my one-on-one has a component of it that's always in the community. And the reason for this is because you and I could figure out how it works, right? We can come up with this mind map that I was talking about. But before you go and talk to your boss about it, it's so great for you to have a community of people in which you can try things and maybe
Mhm.
see different perspectives in. So the community perspective also works with the approaching different parts of your mind. So for example, inside the Naturally Conscious community, we have a writing and creativity group so that you can use those creative skills to try to process things. We also have a book club so you can grab knowledge so that you can process things. We have deep discussions, like plant-inspired myth discussions, so that you can use verbal skills if you want to. We have instead meditation in the creative greenhouse, where instead you can use your somatic skills to be able to go into it. So the idea is you have access to, you don't have to use it all. You have one-on-one with me, and then you have access to this whole other ecosystem that is safe because we all are in there together. And you can then try to, you can approach things from different ways and have people with which you can mirror with. You get to hear what they are doing, and you also get to do back and stuff like that. So my one-on-one work always has access to that entire community for that reason.
Great, wonderful. And how are they able to contact you? So you talked about the community, but what other ways can they contact you directly if they need your help?
Yeah, so I'm really easy because having an unusual name means that everything is based on my name. So tigrillagardenia.com, and you can, or at Tigrilla Gardenia in, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you can find me.
And with that said, listeners, as you can see, she's experienced many things in her lives which has brought her to this point to be able to help you within her business, which can help you in your life at the same time. There's many more things I want to say that makes her a viable person to be with. But considering the state of my voice today, I'm lucky I can speak for so long.
You did great.
Well, I try. So what I would say, look at all the links down below, look at the information, contact her. You've got nothing to lose but time itself. And why not contact her and say hello? In the meantime, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you also for recognizing my own, pieces that maybe I hadn't seen so clearly.
Well, this is when we have a conversation and we flow without written words, right?
Right.
So thank you for being with us. And in the meantime, sayonara, everyone, and have a wonderful day. There we go.
Lovely.
That's done now. Thank you for your patience.
Ah.